try to be brief, and this isn't supposed to be me talking the whole time. So what I'm trying to do here, you read the verse on the screen here, it speaks for itself. As a disclaimer, this is not the verse. I can't find a single opinion that says this is the verse that says there's a mitzvah from this verse, but it speaks for itself in terms of what it says. There's a different verses that people cite as a mitzvah that you have to know that God exists or have faith in God. That's not this verse. The point is simple. Most people confine God to the province of faith. To keep it simple, faith is when you don't have proof. Okay? So the relevance of knowing God exists, which is a stronger position than faith. There's different personalities out there. Speaking for myself, this is something that I needed to have a semblance of religion in my life. And I'm doing this in memory of a friend who passed away last year, who, when he was in high school, did certain things that hurt his life. And eventually he died too young while he was playing with his daughter. And I imagine what his life could have been. This is essentially what saved me. If there's a small chance that it helps other people, it's worth it. So that's basically why this means something to me, and hopefully it's helpful to you. What this verse essentially says, and this is God's words, not mine, it says more than just you have to know that God exists. It actually says how you're supposed to know. The beginning of the verse gives you a blueprint, a map. Moses says, "Inquire now regarding the early days that preceded you, and when God created the earth from one end of the world to the other. Has there ever been anything like this great thing?" Essentially a couple sentences that basically says, go out, go into the world, look through all of time, look through every religion, look through every culture. Try to find a culture that says 10 plagues, splitting of the sea, Exodus, anything close to it. Go look for it. And it ends by saying that you've experienced this before your eyes in order to know that God doesn't say faith, to know. So we're going to talk about how you prove God's existence in this context. It's not my idea, it's right there. Any questions so far? All right. I'm going to start at the end here. I'm going to skip to the answer. This is the gist of it. You know God exists the same way you know anything exists. Raise your hand if you know George Washington existed once. How do you know?
History books.
Not from the history books. I can find you a history book and I can point to the name of a person. It doesn't mean you know they existed. It doesn't mean that. The way you know George Washington exists is the same way you know Caesar existed. It's the same way you know any big historical figure existed. Certain number of people interacted with this person or had lives affected by this person. And when that population gets big enough, it becomes historical fact. It's a bit oversimplified. But our claim as Jews is that we have millions of first-hand witnesses, not just Jewish first-hand witnesses. The world's superpower at the time, Egypt, like the United States in the 90s or the 80s, an unquestioned superpower, millions of people, first-hand witness of some wild things. All of you just did the Seder, which is why I wanted to do this now. The Seder, you know the story. So, false claims of this magnitude are impossible to introduce after the fact. I'll go through it in a second. And there's basically 8 steps. There's going to be pausing for questions along the way. If any of you want to spend time after we go through these 8 steps, there's a lot more behind this, but all I seek to achieve today is a concept. All right, the proof comes with further study. So we're going to take the first step. Okay, there's 2 categories of knowledge that exist in the world. There's first-hand knowledge and second-hand knowledge. It's very simple. First-hand knowledge is things you've seen with your own eyes. You know 1 + 1 is 2. You've met your father, hopefully. right? Everything else is secondhand knowledge. Anyone here never been to Australia? Your knowledge of it is secondhand. Anything you can think of. Who your great-great-grandfather was, secondhand. What percentage of your knowledge do you think is firsthand versus secondhand? That's a question.
Most of it is secondhand.
How much of what you know is firsthand?
Life experience.
Things you've seen, you've heard, you've smelled, you've tasted, you've touched. Versus things secondhand.
1%.
I don't know the actual percentage, but it's pretty small.
Does it depend like the age? Like what age you are? Because what depends the age you go.
100%. The older you are, the more you've experienced firsthand. 100%. There's a Caribbean island called Mustique. It's about $20,000 a night. Most people have never even heard of it. Secondhand knowledge. Tanzania, secondhand knowledge. Anything you know. Pythagorean theorem, unless you've studied the actual proof. Secondhand knowledge. Vast majority of what you know.
Josh, you're suggesting that direct photography or direct live video feed is not first-hand knowledge?
I think it's subjective. I would consider that firsthand. Although nowadays the ability to fake that maybe makes it questionable.
100%.
But if you don't overthink it, keep it simple, then it's firsthand. You're still looking at something. But I can't show you video of Caesar. All right.
Julius
Julius.
Now this is easy to say. This is easy to say, but what type of knowledge do you rely on to make big decisions in life? You go to a doctor. No, Leon, you got it right. You go to a doctor. You're not going to medical school to validate what they tell you. You go to a jewelry store. You're going to spend a lot of money. Maybe you go to multiple stores. If you're really diligent, maybe you go to 3 or 4 stores. It's still nothing. It's still not firsthand. You go to war. You decide to go left or right. You decide to trust intelligence. Every choice you make, even the biggest ones, are secondhand knowledge. So to keep it simple, a lot of people like to say, no, I need to see God, I need to experience God, I need a miracle. It's a spoiler, a miracle is not going to prove God to you either. We just finished this week's Parsha. We had the Egel Azav, the golden calf. The generation that literally experienced it. It doesn't change who you are. You still have free will. This isn't going to change your life either, but it might be something in your head. All right, so secondhand knowledge is admissible as evidence. That's all this page, that's the only concept for that. Any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Doesn't some people say that, like, you know, like, I don't know, like some people say that whenever like God gave like the Shnei Luchot, which is like the 10 Commandments to Moses, people say, or we were all there, like we were all like over there, like all of us.
So Rabbi Zamenhof can tell you the source of that. I can't. I've heard it before too. But even if you leave that out, the people who were physically alive at that time, who had been alive 10 minutes before and 10 minutes after as well, is still millions of people. All right?
You want me to answer now?
Go for it.
This is only the neshama, the soul. It's not a physical body. But they tell you we were there with our soul. Our physical body was not there. What Josh is trying to tell you is that God exists by seeing it's physical. Understand it's closer to our knowledge.
Okay, this one can be very triggering in the modern world. Okay? Every meaningful statement about reality is true or false. Nowadays, this is a tough pill to swallow. But we'll go through some examples, all right? Someone tells you Coke is better than Pepsi, right? Someone says it's sunny and 65 degrees outside. Someone says Jedi used the Force. The examples go on forever. One of the reasons people chafe at this statement, every meaningful statement about reality is true or false, is because a lot of statements are just vague, or they're not talking about reality. Jedi use the Force is not talking about reality, it's fiction. Coke is better than Pepsi. If someone's telling you Coke is objectively better than Pepsi, something which is subjective cannot be objective. It's false. If they mean to say Coke tastes better to me than Pepsi, it's true. Assuming they're not lying to you. So just because the statement is vague doesn't mean the broader assertion here. Every meaningful statement is true or false. It's sunny and 65 degrees outside. Let's say it's really 67 degrees. So you say, oh, there's half-truths because it's sunny, but it's only 67, it's not 65. Well, that's an instance where you're taking two independent statements about reality, you're making them one sentence, it doesn't make it one statement. It's sunny outside is either true or false. 65 degrees outside is either true or false. But no matter what example you want to think of, every meaningful statement about reality is true or false. And by the way, true or false is very fundamental to this. Because the essence of the existence of God, what you're really proving on some level is that there is such a thing as true and false. Without God, there is no such thing as true and false. Without God, what I think is true, I have my truth, you have you truth. There is no truth. So there has to be an acceptance that everything meaningful. The other reason this is important is because we have certain meaningful statements at the bottom here. We have 10 plagues. We're saying they happened. We left Egypt, Mount Sinai, etc. These are statements about reality. We have to evaluate if they're true or false. But we have to accept the concept that true and false exists. Hopefully easy for us, but it's increasingly difficult in the world. All right, so how are we getting to truth? There are two ways, and only two ways, things are wrong. Ignorance. You think you know something you don't. Maybe you have bad memory. It's a form of ignorance. But basically, you have good intent. You think you're right, but really you're wrong, for one reason or another. The other is lying, fabrication. Now, in order to lie, someone has to have motive, like they say in court. You have to have motive to lie. Something you want out of it. Maybe you enjoy doing it, whatever your motive is. So, a formula for truth seeks to get rid of ignorance and fabrication on a reasonable level. 4 basic questions. Whoever's talking to you, do they have a reliable reputation? Do they have relevant information to support the claim? How many first-hand witnesses were involved? And do they have something to gain by lying? If someone is, a pretty respectable person, a rabbi says, someone says, there was a fight somewhere, whatever the case might be. You respect them. You don't think they're lying to you. You think they know what they're talking about. They're able to give you details about it. So-and-so were involved. It was at such and such time of day, whatever the case might be. This is how it started. This is how it ends. They have all these details. All right, starting to believe them. What are they talking about? They're talking about a big fight. 50 people saw it. Well, increasingly likely they're telling the truth. If they're claiming 50 or 49 other people saw it and they don't know what they're talking about, it's very easy for them to look stupid. Last thing is, what's their motive to lie? We'll get into that. I want to focus mostly on the first-hand witness question. As I started at the end, you know where this is going. It's very difficult to lie about something that involves millions of first-hand witnesses. It's almost impossible, if not literally impossible. So a couple of questions at the bottom here. All right. It's the 1970s because I needed pre-cell phone in this example. It's the 1970s, you've never been to New York, you land in New York City, you get in a cab, you say, take me to Central Park. Cab driver drops you off. How do you know you're actually there? Signs, right? You could ask people, hey, where am I? Would you expect a cab driver to know where Central Park is?
Yes.
Okay. So you have a reliable reputation, relatively speaking. You may think they went the long way. That wasn't the question. All right?
Make money.
Do they have relevant information to support the claim? You mentioned signs. Maybe you see trees, you see grass. All right, looks like a park. How many first-hand witnesses are involved? Well, you can ask people there. Does the cab driver have anything to gain from dropping you off in the wrong place? So we can debate it, but let's just assume they don't. All right? Odds are, in the 1970s, when you got out of the cab, you were in Central Park, or wherever you wanted to be. Another example, the U.S. fought Britain in a Revolutionary War of Independence. At some point in your life, someone told you that, maybe. How do you know it's true? How many people are involved in a war.
Enough to continue it to go.
A lot of people are involved in a war. Who's telling you this? Your teacher. Generally speaking, you can trust your teachers. Do they have information to support the claim? It's their job. They have all the details you could possibly know. Then they test you on the details. Does your teacher have motive to lie? If they get caught lying, they are fired. They are not going to teach again. Odds are when they taught you this, it's true. Very simple formula. Okay? So now you take this formula, you apply it to what Moshe said to do. You go across the isms around the world. Not all of these are necessarily religions, by the way. The list at the top, these 10, represent greater than 99.99% of the world. Okay? Those who want to stay late, you want to know more about it, it's not the objective to get into these isms, but I have some, you can talk about it if you're interested. If you go left to right, you have atheism, Buddhism, and Jainism reject the notion of God. They're obviously not going to give you evidence of God's existence if their philosophies don't support that. Shintoism, Confucianism, Hinduism, agnosticism do not claim any direct revelation in any verifiable sense, i.e. there's no witnesses. Christianity, Islam, Sikhism, and Baha'ism, certain individuals perform miracles. There were witnesses. Okay? So you take a case. I don't know if it's still true today, but over a decade ago when I started this, Christianity was the most populous religion in the world. I'm not going to read Christianity's claims. Maybe you've heard it. The gist of it is that people are inherently flawed. There's something wrong with all of us. None of us are perfect. We're going to sin. Rather than live in misery in that inevitability, Jesus died for your sins. All you have to do is accept his sacrifice. And then it's okay that you're imperfect. It sells. It'll make you feel real good about yourself. Okay? Now, if you assume someone reliable and someone who's not trying to lie to you is telling you this story, you ask the same, the Pope. Do they have a reliable reputation? Let's just assume yes. Do they have detail to support their claim? Usually they do. How many first-hand witnesses involved? It's not even stated. It's not even something that came across the writer's mind. It might shock you to know. But let's say thousands. Make up your number. Is anything to gain by lying? Again, debatable. But let's just assume the person is being honest. Short version is, this is faith, because you don't have a lot of first-hand witnesses. It's that simple. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with faith, but it's not as strong as knowledge. Okay? Now, I could have picked Islam, Sikhism, or Baha'ism, but it's the same story. You don't have many, if any, first-hand witnesses. Okay? Very simple. You can believe in it if you want. Okay. But it's faith. All right, so now you have Judaism.
Okay.
Very, very different. All right? Now, I'm going to skip to the punchline here because all of you should know the basic story. You have millions of people. You have 10 plagues predicted when they would start, when they would end, that were selective in who they impacted. You have an exodus. You've got splitting of the sea. You've got people drinking water from rocks. You've got people eating magical food. The list of miracles, Rabbi Zalmanoff will tell you stories about the miracles. An endless list of miracles. Open miracles. I'm not even getting into the conquest of Israel, where literally time stopped during one of the battles. It's big things, okay? You have millions of first-hand witnesses, even if we assume the rest is easy. It's a very, very big challenge. So the question you might ask, if it's really this simple, how come a majority of the people that we interact with, including very, very, very intelligent people, why isn't this good enough? So the answer in terms of why this isn't good enough basically boils down to this. All right? Yeah, and I try to avoid reading. The gist of what this says at the top is the reality is people do make things up. King Arthur's table, whatever it is your thing. These things maybe over time can turn from folktale to reality. Someone will tell you, well, you believe it because your parents told it to you and you were mind washed as a child, whatever the case might be. I'm not going to fight that. Okay, go ahead, yeah.
Aren't there actually a lot of religions that like still exist that were like didn't have a lot of first-hand witnesses and just continued on by not even knowing the truth? Like one person said, "Oh, God told me this," and people just believed it and just went on.
So the question is, aren't there a lot of religions that don't have a lot of first-hand witnesses and people just believe?
Yeah.
The answer is every single one of them, except for Judaism. What Moshe said to do when the book was written all those years ago, go from one side of the world to the other and see if anyone ever makes a claim like this. You could call it prophecy if you want. How did he know no one would make the claim? Again, we think he's a prophet. If you're skeptical, you don't think he's a prophet. He's a guy who wrote a book, but the book is still very old, and to the date, today, you're not going to find anyone in the world making this claim. It's a ballsy claim. People are making up some crazy things in our world. But, all right, so why do people not believe it? Well, there's two basic arguments to this. There's a mass conspiracy argument on the left, and what a vast majority of Bible critics subscribe to on the right. Quickly, the mass conspiracy argument says deliberate lies, like the Soviet Union, right? Someone took over. This is what's true and this is what's false. Everything else is gone. If you question it, you go to Siberia. Take this as a metaphor, take this literally. Some version of that happened. So here's the problem with a mass conspiracy. You have small scale, if you look at the arrows, small scale is someone tells you, hey, I'm a Navy SEAL. It's a small circle to keep that lie a secret. And you have large scale, the US attacked itself on 9/11. A lot of people believe this. That would involve anywhere from 1,000 to 15,000 people, let's say, right? To keep a lie like that. A mass conspiracy is like what Iran tries to push. The Holocaust never happened. And what's crazy about it is literally the word mass conspiracy means millions of people are all agreeing to tell the lie. Now, if we had more time, I'd pull one of you aside and say, listen, we're going to make up a lie right now. And we're going to see if we can get anyone in this room to believe this lie. None of you are going to believe anything we tell you. Okay? Mass conspiracy, someone has to be able to convince millions of people. Soviet Union tried. When the door closed, they're still teaching their kids whatever they want to teach their kids. Okay? So mass conspiracy, virtually no one makes this argument. Virtually no one. I only say virtually. I couldn't find a single person who makes this argument in 14 years. But theoretically, it's out there. Yeah.
I mean, the idea of Iran teaching their people that the Holocaust never existed, I wouldn't be surprised if you polled the population of Iran and 80% of the population believed the Holocaust never existed.
Could be. And if you polled people in the Soviet Union in the 80s and asked them the right question, you might get a similar type of dynamic. The question is, will that stick over enough time? And the answer is, it didn't in the Soviet Union, and arguably it didn't in any historical case that I tried to find. Theoretically, what you're saying is sound, which is why it's on the page. But I can't even fake defend it, even though I did try. What I can fake defend is what 99.9% of everyone I found who criticizes the Bible in any meaningful way. All right? So parents, grandparents can be ignorant of their origin, especially if their parents and grandparents were murdered in pogroms, right? So you have small-scale conspiracy, gets taught to children, it becomes medium-scale, it becomes large-scale. So basically, this is like gradual evolution. It's not true, it's from thousands and thousands of years ago, but like it became true over time, okay? This is the point. I want him to ask questions. Danny, what's your question?
Isn't like a lot of these things, like when people believe lies, doesn't it sometimes have to do with like, you know, like government or something like that, when people like tell their children or something and they believe it right away? Could that like also be similar to that?
It could be similar to that, but I will remind everybody, and I'll pick on you for a second. In order for your parents to tell you a lie, mommy and daddy have to agree on that. And when you're older and you're married, you'll know how hard it is to get mommy and daddy to agree to tell lies. And even if you can get mommy and daddy to agree to tell the lie, her side of the family's got to back you. His side of the family's got to back you. Your friends, their mommies and daddies and their side of the marriages have to back you. Rabbi Zalmanov has to back you. There's lots of opportunities for people to tell you, what are you talking about? Okay? Not so simple. So, here's where this may start to look a little bit different. All right? It's not my goal to fight a logical argument that something that happened 3,000 years ago maybe didn't happen, something else happened. We told ourselves stories 2,500 years ago. Everyone knew that they weren't literal, but they became literal over time. It's logical. It makes sense. I'm not going to fight that. I'm going to ask you a question. We all just finished our Passover Seder. We said we were slaves in Egypt. We have all this reference content about Egypt. From Marar to, we count the months, not from Rosh Hashanah. We count from, what month are we in, Rabbi? Nisan. Why do we count from Nisan? Honor of the Exodus. Paschal Lamb. A whole book of Psachim. Gemara Psachim. A whole book I can give you. Okay? I don't need to fight the logic. When was this introduced? And how was it when was it introduced and how did people come to take it literally? Where a mother will teach it to her child. Your father will tell you that this literally happened to you. And no one's going to say BS. Everyone agrees. When was this introduced? Okay? This is where the Bible critics stop thinking. Okay? The Bible critics have no answer to this question that I've been able to find.
Sure.
So we're going to get into it.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the self-deprecation that's in the Bible, because why would people want to tell anything bad about their history? They would only want to pick things that were good if they were really fabricating something. But the fact that they were honest and direct about a lot of not such great things and a lot of errors along the way, they still documented it.
So there's two common answers to this question. Number one is that culture changes over time, and they didn't realize what they were saying is bad. You're interpreting it as bad from a modern cultural standpoint. But from their perspective, there was nothing wrong with it whatsoever. For a majority of time, no one had a problem with slavery. For a majority of time, no one had a problem with more than one wife. For a majority of time, no one had a problem with having concubines. So there's a cultural argument to it. There's another argument to it, which is, well, they did it in order to give you the ability to ask that question. How do I convince you that it's true? I deliberately make it honest so that you get to say, oh, it's honest, and therefore it proves that it's true. It's like a form of manipulation. Someone who doesn't want to believe this is going to give you those two answers or something else. But it's not a proof. Where the real proof is, I have millions of people who saw something. Because you don't have millions of people who saw George Washington. Or anything. Millions, before TV, for millions of people to witness something is a tectonic thing. Okay? So, when was it introduced? There's a couple of things. So you have Moshe dying in 1273. Now, these times I'm giving, the numbers are going to be getting smaller as you get closer to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD. Okay? So if you see the numbers getting smaller, that's why. So I'm using like the secular calendar because it's more intuitive for most people. So Moshe dies in 1273. Joshua dies in 1245. By the time Joshua dies, you have the Mishkan and Shiloh. Israel's been partitioned. It's a country. All right? You have a whole bunch of judges with the dates. Then you have the kings, First Temple. The schism refers to, for those who don't know, Yehuda and Binyamin made their own country. Everyone else made the other country. It wasn't peaceful. Let's just say they didn't agree on things. Okay? You have Saul, David, Solomon. Then you have between 800 and 400 BCE. You have the Jewish people not unified, not consistently religious. They were not at peace, numerous wars. You have constant or near constant Jewish publications. you have a whole bunch of prophets, right? So the conceptual proof is, you think about this time period, and you think about what we believe today. Part of what I'm selling you, let's just pretend I'm lying to you, or I'm just drinking my own Kool-Aid. I'm trying to convince you of this. I'm not just trying to convince you that God exists and Egypt happened. I'm trying to convince you that Egypt happened, and then Joshua happened, and the land was partitioned, and then we had all these judges, who, by the way, were almost all from completely different tribes. Some of those tribes didn't get along. Different kings. Those kings, except for Solomon, virtually had no peace. You have irreligious people basically thereafter, all these different prophets. I'm selling you that timeline as well. And that's where part of the problem comes in, right? So you have to ask yourself, I'm selling you from now on, like, when was Passover introduced? When was that first Haggadah handed out? This happened to you. Last year you weren't sitting at the table reading Haggadah. Now you're going to read this thing, you're going to eat tomorrow. It's a lot to take on. Forget, like, korbanos, offerings. It's a lot. The amount of laws we have. I can't serve you food tonight. It's a lot to take on. So the real proof comes is that you have to think through a period of time where, all right, let's try to get this introduced. Now, just to give this a minute, and I want to make this a bit interactive. All right. I want someone to throw out a year. When was this made up?
What do you mean,
A year.
Any?
Any time in history between Egypt and the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans. Pick your year.
600 BC.
600. I'll zoom in if y'all can't see it. All right, so now we're going through time from creation. We're moving along. Moving along. All right, we're getting warmer. Okay. We're around 600 right here.
Josh, where's this list from?
This list is from 15 years of books and Google and Wikipedia.
So you made it?
Yeah, and
Wow.
codexes. So, all right. So you're in year 600. You have a secular timeline, which I'm not really going to get too much into right now. You have a Jewish timeline. You can be forgiven for not having any idea who these people are. Okay? The problem that you have is, again, it doesn't. What's written here doesn't have to be true. Because whether it's true or not isn't the test. What's true is this timeline is part of the lie that I'm selling. Which means the timeline is part of what I'm selling. So if I'm in 600 right now, and I'm coming to you, and I'm saying, just 7 years ago, there was a rebellion against Zechariah. It was a public murder or execution. He declared himself king of Israel, blah, blah, blah. Or I go up, or I go down. These dates are not old anymore. They're new, they're right now. So, it's very difficult to tell a lie when part of the lie is like, well, that didn't happen. I've never heard of that. I think I would have heard if there was a public execution, or that didn't happen in 607. It happened 500 years later, or 200 years ago. It's very difficult to tell that lie. And this is kind of the problem. When you think about, if I go back real quick to the PowerPoint, these are the isms, sorry. All right, let me zoom in a little bit. I'm not just selling you the Torah. I'm selling you the book of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and I can go to the next page, right? You have estimated publication dates here. You've got summaries of what these books are if you don't know what they are. The column all the way to the right tells you how many references there are, quote unquote, to the lie that I'm telling you, right? Whatever year you picked 600, Johnny. The estimate for the book of Hosea is in that window. I'm also selling you that book. You've never heard of you? You never heard of Hosea? Interesting. But he's alive and he wrote this book. This book, by the way, directly connects to an unbroken timeline of events, of people, of references. unbroken. So it's not, Bible critics, they stop with, oh, Egypt is 3,000 years ago. So, no, you're selling it all. And there's no break in the timeline. So it's very, very, very difficult to introduce this law. Okay? All the way through to Book of Malachi, if you're going through the Psukim. So it's not just this. You have all of Tanakh. You have an unbroken timeline. You have Josephus, which is considered a secular work. You have Dead Sea Scrolls, which the entire Tanakh, with the potential exception of Esther, was there exactly as we have it today. And of the secular works, and by secular works in the Dead Sea Scrolls, I'm talking about they're recording community rules that they have, or trades that they do. Even in the secular works, there are so many countless references to the events that happen. It's just, I don't know how you make this up. I don't know how you get people to believe it. You want to say, go back to someone forced it. Who? You want to say it was King David? His own son tried to murder him. He didn't live a day of his life in peace. You want to say it was Joshua? Okay. Good luck trying to convince, hey, your parents went through this. No, they didn't. I know who my parents are. I think they would have mentioned it. It wasn't Joshua. You want to say maybe it's Solomon? Yes, Solomon had the authority and he had the ability maybe to force something. But the problem is right after Solomon, you had the schism. The big, essentially, basically a breakup. Judah and Benjamin going here, and the 10 tribes going there. There was never this time where, even Moshe, we tried to kill him, twice? Rabbi, you tell me. At least once he said they were going to kill me, maybe twice. There is no period of time where anyone can convince any of you of anything that your own parents and grandparents hadn't already told you. And this is the other thing that's unique about Judaism. Christianity is a big religion. Where is Christianity prominent today? What part of the world?
Everywhere. Western countries. USA.
Western countries. USA, Europe. The stories about Jesus, where did those stories happen?
Europe. Rome.
Israel. Middle East. Interesting. The region where it happened, no one believes it. Because I can't make up things about your history. It's one thing I can go to you and say, hey, I'm moving from New York to China. When I get to China, I'm going to tell all these people about this miracle that happened, and there was a war between the French and the English, and the English were losing, and then God split the English Channel, and the English escaped through the dry land, through the English Channel to England, and they survived. I might be able to sell that in China. I'm not going to be able to sell that in London. But Egypt believes this. Israel believes this. You can't rewrite basic fundamental history. And there's no reason, the amount of things that Islam changed in the Torah, the amount of things that Christianity changed in the Torah, they kept this. Why?
That's true.
You can't rewrite basic history and expect people to buy it. Now, did they change things? Sure. If you're interested in what they changed, it's a separate thing. But it's impossible. And to the extent you know that George Washington existed, that is nothing compared to this evidence. It is literally nothing. So usually people like to ask about carbon dating. They like to ask about archaeology. This is just open questions. That's the gist of it. Any open questions? Yeah.
Just two questions. First, this is the jumbled Kuzari principle by Gali, but I'm assuming you adapted it from there. He mentions about Christianity that he himself says it's plausible. He adapts all the arguments that you're using here.
Mm-hmm.
I read his paper. He said that the reason that Christianity gets destroyed, sort of, is that because we have a verse in Tanakh that says false prophets sort of can't believe in that. So even if it did occur that Yeshu did exist and that happened, it doesn't.
Well, Yeshu probably did exist, and
Yeah.
according to my studies, there were two of them actually, which probably contributes to why they thought he was resurrected. But there was a Yeshu who lived, my memory's a little rusty, call it 100 years prior to the one everyone thought was God. This one was in yeshiva, and got kicked out of yeshiva for doing questionable things as well. Gemara talks about it.
Kicked out for Amen Yishmer Allah.
Yeah.
For Amen. We're in the middle of prayers, and he did not give respect to someone else, and they took him out of yeshiva.
But to answer your question, and I don't mean to disappoint you, but the title of this is Proving God Exists. I can prove to you that God exists to the extent I can prove to you anything exists. I'm not proving that if you took Judaism today and got in a time machine and went and met with Jews 2,000 years ago, I don't know how much of what we do they will recognize, how much of what we do they will not recognize. The best thing that I can tell you is that the Dead Sea Scrolls look like some version of Hasidic Judaism that isn't nothing I've ever heard of or seen, but it's still not the same thing. It is faith that as things progress over time, what we have today is still exactly what it was before. It evolves, it changes. I can't prove that to you. I can prove to you that God exists. And the important thing, going full circle, the importance of proving God exists is if God exists, there's such a thing as right and wrong, and it's not up to us what that is. We don't decide what right and wrong is. That's why we wanted to eat from the tree. We wanted it to be our choice. But if God exists, right and wrong exists, and we don't get to decide what it is. Any other questions? Yeah.
Josh, what's the strongest archaeological evidence today for this idea?
Okay. All right. So the short answer is a vast majority of archaeologists, or let's just broaden that term to just say people into this, and they try to take a scientific lens. There are certain archaeologists and scientists who find what they consider to be corroborative evidence, but a vast majority of archaeologists and scientists say there's no evidence whatsoever. Now, the reason for this is that archaeology is two things. One, it's luck in terms of where you happen to dig. So, presumably, let's assume you have a backyard. 2,000 years later, I decide to dig in your backyard. I may find no evidence that you ever existed. Meanwhile, your house is 15 feet that way. Okay? So where you dig is everything. And in a desert where the sand can move, it's a big place to be looking for something. If you're lucky enough to find something, there's a tremendous amount of subjectivity in terms of how you interpret it. So here's an example. All right, so there's a huge inconsistencies between the Jewish timeline and the non-Jewish timeline. For example, when the first temple was destroyed. The secular, you go to Britannica, you go to Wikipedia, you go to the top minds in the world, they'll tell you that it happened approximately 587 BC. In the Jewish timeline, 423. It's over 100 years difference. The entire reason why all of the schools are going to tell you it's 587 is because of the Nebuchadnezzar Chronicle. Short version is that there was a dealer who showed up in the desert in the 1980s and said, I found something, and he wanted to sell it to an archaeologist. Archaeologist bought it. Now, they translate it roughly as you see here, it's italicized, and it references the 7th year, assume it's Nebuchadnezzar, the month of Kislev, etc. So there's a date on here which they roughly get to 589 BCE. So here's an example of this. A, they have no idea where the cylinder came from. A big part of knowing how old something is, how reliable something is finding it what they call in situ. Kind of fresh, you might say. So without the ability to kind of establish an environment, to carbon date nearby fossils, to thoroluminescent date nearby minerals, things like that, it's very difficult. And then what are you interpreting? You're interpreting a dead language that doesn't exist anymore. How do we know what we're saying? If you ask me to read a cylinder in Russian, okay. So you have, it doesn't refer to Jerusalem directly. It mentions a city of Uadu. People got together, they interpreted this to mean city of Judah, and then they interpreted that that refers to Jerusalem. The reality is, we don't know where this thing came from. It mentions a city, which is interpreted to mean city of Judah, which is again interpreted to be Jerusalem. It could be a different Judean city. It could be not a city of Judah. All of us are called Jews. Maybe, the point is, there's a lot of guesswork. And this is true not just of, these cylinders that are found. It's true of dating methodologies. So in terms of like carbon-14 dating, there's a tremendous amount of atmospheric variation, isotope fractionalism, and reservoir effects, which scientists, by the way, very, very impressively try to compensate for with the amount of like study and math that goes into coming up with compensation curves to adjust for stuff like this. But basically, people would have you believe, and I believed this, the science supporting dating and the science supporting archaeology was closer to 1 + 1 = 2. Pythagorean theorem, something a bit more standard. But the reality is what you're doing is taking very sophisticated concepts, very sophisticated forms of math and chemistry. You're trying to isolate as many variables as you can, but there's still a great number of variables. And then you're trying to offset the things that you don't know and you can't control by making very educated guesses. But it's a sophisticated form of estimation. It's not precise. So for me personally, I didn't go through the archaeology and, I went down the rabbit hole, but I didn't get anywhere with it. Because at the end of the day, last thing I'll say about it, have you ever been to your great-great-grandfather's kever, his grave?
No.
Do you need to dig up his bones to know he existed?
No. Good point. Yeah, great point.
So it's there for two reasons. It's there because someone wants an excuse not to believe in something, or it's there because they have a genuine open mind. They don't know. They're digging. What they find is still something, and they're trying to learn as much as they can from it. But in this context, it's very often like, if you lose the remote and someone says, well, where did you check? And you say, I literally only checked right here, this spot, right there. That's the spot I checked. Well, it's not there. Clearly it didn't happen. There's never a remote. It's beyond a needle in a haystack looking for any of the X. What are you looking for in the wilderness? Sukkot. We didn't build permanent dwellings. We took everything with us. What are you looking for? It even says, you call it convenient, but it says, well before we knew anything about archaeology as a people, it says that our clothing didn't deteriorate. We didn't go to the bathroom. This is before we knew anything about science, right? We weren't getting ahead of it. So what are you looking for? There's nothing. You're looking for something that, but we don't find chariots from the splitting of the sea in Pharaoh's army. I dare you to go 5 steps into the ocean at Jones Beach, take off a pair of sunglasses, close your eyes, go like this, and try to find the sunglasses. Look, you just threw it down, and I know this firsthand because we looked for it. We couldn't find it. 5 minutes.
Yeah, you'll find it.
When things hit the ocean,
Done.
it's gone.
Yes.
So what about the archaeologists that say that they found pharaohs, Egyptian chariots?
The point is, with archaeology, unfortunately, it's a lot like art, and it's in the eye of the beholder, and people tend to find what they're looking for. And that's not, I'm no better than them. That's just people. We tend to find what we're looking for. But again, the claim here is that millions of people witness something. I don't know how you introduce that. I really don't.
To separate it from history.
And that's why, like, if ever you're talking to your friends, you're talking to your kids, you're talking to other people, forget archaeology, forget all this, because stick with your strength. Millions of people witnessed this. You want to say it didn't happen? Fine. When was that introduced? When? Okay. I'm happy to pull up any date anyone wants. This problem is there no matter what date you pick. You go too far back, what? You're going to say that the grandparents actually lived through it. They were still alive. It's too close. You want to go too far? It's all already there. You want to go in the middle? There's no peace. There's no conditions that would be conducive to people just... We went to the moon, just kidding. It's a lot. And the evidence for this, the real evidence, if this is a lot, I'll close it here, but like, if you just read the quotes, you go through Tanakh, you go through Josephus, you go through the Dead Sea Scrolls, and there's 330 pages of this, so I'm not going to scroll, right? And it starts with in Genesis, and you just read the quotes. This is what I'm selling you. 330 pages of 8-point font quotes. Some of these quotes will blow your mind. Okay? It's everywhere. It's in the hook. You read Oz Yashir in the morning. It's everywhere. It's pervasive. So that's it. That's the gist of it. Any other questions?
Yes, I wanted to make a comment, give some juice to your story, and a note out there.
You want to come up?
The comment is that what I said on Shabbat, you could be a professor, you are.
100%.
Oh,
It's
'cause
an
I talked
amazing
too
job.
much.
It's a
Yes.
good paper.
Great job.
The note
Super.
is just about the conspiracy. If you look through history, I think should add up to your brain mind, everything disappeared. Any conspiracy that came in the world, it took a while, some of them disappeared faster, some of them took a while, but all the conspiracies
Disappeared.
disappeared. It means that any lie, anything that someone will tell you, by the end, will disappear. Cannot be there. Either you'll catch it, it's a lie, and nobody will believe anymore, or it's going to disappear itself. That's what happened. Look at the nations. Knani, Prizi, Emori, where are they? All disappeared. So conspiracies that somebody was trying to create something to be a strong nation, they're not there. Only ones are staying with the Jewish people. And a little bit juice to your story. That's a famous, I always, when I introduce believing in God, that's what I introduce. I said with Stalin. You ever heard that from me? So just a taste of this philosophy. At the time of Stalin, one of the things that Stalin had, his regime had, is they used to say Stalin is God. There's no God. God is not existent. This was the main thing in his life. And therefore, he did not let the Jewish people keep Shabbat, do Brit Milah, Kasher, nothing. And they always said, you have to follow Stalin. And why Stalin said this? He came with logic. He said, do you see God? No. So you could only relate what's going on in this world, things that existed. If you see it, it's there. If you don't see it, it's not. So if you don't see God, it's not there. So that was the schools, that's what they were teaching at this time. What the Jewish people that kept Chabad, that kept, underground, how did they do it? So as much as Stalin was Yimach Shemo, the Jewish people were still going by the book. So if a kid his parents wanted him to keep Shabbat, comes Monday, they come to school, they bring a note, a sick note. The kid was sick. Everybody knew it's a bluff. Everybody knew the kids are bluffing. So the teachers at the class on Mondays used to get up and every time pick on another kid and try to show that we know that you're bluffing, but we're going by the book. If you bring a note, it's okay. So what this story that I'm telling you now happened with the previous Rabbi of Lubavitch. He was a kid and he brought a note on Monday and the teacher stands up and is trying to give a whole lecture that whatever is existing, whatever you see is existing, whatever you don't see is not there. So there's no God. So how he wanted to do that, he makes fun of the kids. You bring a note, we know you kept Shabbat, but there's no God. So he turns back to the kids and said, like, guys, you see the walls? Yeah, existed. You see the bulletin board? Yes. You see the camera? Yes. And he goes, you see the table? You see the chair? Everything you see, it's there. We understand. Then he goes to his body parts. Says, you see my face? Yes. You see my eyes, my ear, my nose, my hand, my fingers, my legs, everything. You see? So it's existent. Meaning that whatever you see is there. You see God? No. So this Rabbi, he was a little kid, 8 years old. He was in the mood. So he goes to the teacher and said, could I ask the kids also some questions? Sure, go ahead. Said to the kids, do you see the teacher's hands? Yes. You see his eyes? Yes. And he goes on every single part of his body. So he's there. Do you see his mind? No.
No.
He's stupid. Got it? God, we don't have to see, we have to believe. That's the bottom line. After all, you proof.
If you're interested in the PowerPoint.
Thank you, Josh.
It's okay. This is a website. If you click, when you get to the website, if you scroll down, you'll get to this. It starts there. You get down to here. If you click this, it gives you the PowerPoint you just saw. If you click the other one, it gives you the 330 page.
Can you ask him to send the link on the WhatsApp?
Sure. Send me the link.
Yeah, that's, we'll do it.
Maybe you should put this into a book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This would be a great book.
So first he has to get the PhD. He got it from Rabbi Zamlo. Wait a second. Takes a while.
Thank you.